Ay, magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Good morning. My name is Jean Encinas Franco. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Political Science, and I am delighted to be your moderator in this morning's tenure lecture of our promising and young faculty, Marielle Marcaida, Assistant Professor of the Department of Political Science. Her work is titled Understanding the Narratives of Pateros Mothers' Resistance Under the Philippine Drug War, a very timely and significant issue in today's administration. I'd like to welcome you all to this lecture. And on that note, I'd like to call the chair of the Department of Political Science, Professor Herman Kraft, to give us his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Jean. And I'd like to welcome all of you who are here joining us in this lecture. To my colleagues in the Department of Political Science, this is going to be one of the more important parts of our traditions, if you will. The idea of assessing our colleagues who will be joining us as a member of the tenured faculty. This has been one of the idea of a tenured lecture has been one of the more important traditions that we've actually had in the past few years, because this actually is a way by which we, as a department, are able to assess the kinds of capabilities that we are actually bringing, that we are expecting of our faculty. But this is not just an assessment, really, to a large extent, and this goes to those who have joined us who are not from the Department of Political Science. This is also an exhibition of the department's commitment to honor and excellence, the shibboleths that the University of the Philippines lives by, because it is our way of actually showing the kinds of qualities that we are looking for in terms of scholarship and the ability to actually articulate the results of that scholarship from the members of the faculty who are expected to join the ranks of the tenured faculty. So this is actually both something that's important to the Department of Political Science, as well as an exhibition or a way by which we demonstrate our commitment to the kind of expectations are that the University of the Philippines is supposed to live by. And so with that, I think I'll just like to again repeat welcome and thank you very much for joining us in this very important part of the tasks that the Department of Political Science works out for itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kraft. At this point, I'd like to call Professor Ruth Lusterio Rico, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, to introduce our lecturer for today.
Thank you, Jean. Good morning. Good morning to everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our candidate for tenure and lecturer for this morning, Assistant Professor Marielle Y. Marcaida. Assistant Professor Marcaida, or Yeng to us, her colleagues and friends, is an alumna of our department. She is one of our graduates in our BA-MA Honors Political Science program. She graduated with a BA Honors degree in 2015, of course with the cum laude, and earned the MA Honors degree the following year. After graduation, Assistant Professor Marcaida taught at the University of Santo Tomas. Then she joined us in the department in August 2018, and since then has taught a variety of courses, including courses in political theory, comparative politics, Philippine government and politics, and SOCSI 2, or social, economic, and political thought. She also helped the college in the teaching of NSTP. Aside from teaching, Assistant Professor Marcaida has also been involved in research. And as expected, this involvement helped her to eventually produce 3 published refereed works. She was a research fellow of the Strategic Studies Program of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, or CIDS, from 2019 to 2020. Her involvement in the CIDS program enabled Assistant Professor Marcaida to write the chapter Organized Crime, Illicit Economies, and Philippine-China Relations, included in the book Towards an Enhanced Strategic Policy in the Philippines, edited by Aris A. Arugay and Herman Joseph Kraft, published in 2020. Yang was also able to publish a paper based on her master's thesis. This is the article Student Activism, Offline and Online, a mixed method study on college students' protest participation in the Philippines, published in the Journal of the College, Philippine Social Sciences Review, Volume 72, Number 1, which came out last year. Her third publication is the article Understanding the Narratives of Pateros Mothers' Resistance under the Philippine Drug War, published in the latest issue of the Philippine Political Science Journal. This is her tenure piece, which she will deliver this morning. I think it is also worth mentioning that for this paper, Assistant Professor Marcaida received the Brooklyn McNeil Ray of Hope Award for Best Research Abstract for this paper when she presented it at the Harm Reduction International Conference in 2019. Assistant Professor Marcaida is one of the members of our faculty who has been very active in extension work. She has been involved in various extension activities organized by our department and by the college. She was actively involved in the organizing committee for the 2019 CSSP Faculty Conference, the Secretariat of the Department's Prof project in 2019, and currently she is part of the committee in charge of the department's UP sa Halalan 2022 project. Since Yang was my student in her undergraduate political analysis course back when she was a sophomore, I believe, I think I can say that I have personally witnessed how she has developed professionally, from being a young scholar to a promising member of our faculty. If you worked with her or had been her student or a friend of Yang's, you'll most likely agree that she works with much enthusiasm and dedication and maintains a very positive disposition. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to give you now one of the youngest members of our faculty, our very promising candidate for tenure, Assistant Professor Marielle Y. Marcaida.
Thank you very much, Professor Rico, for the very lovely introduction, and most especially for recommending my tenure. Before anything else, I would also like to thank my colleagues within and outside the department for being with me here today, despite the very hectic finals week schedule and the increasing number of COVID cases. And not to mention, of course, my students who found time to attend my lecture this morning, despite their final requirements. I would also like to express my appreciation to my friends and family who are both here with us in Zoom right now, and the others who are currently tuning in the YouTube live stream. Isang malaking shout out sa inyong lahat. So welcome to my tenure lecture, wherein I will be discussing my latest publication from the Philippine Political Science Journal, entitled Understanding the Narratives of Pateros Mothers' Resistance under the Philippine Drug War. To begin with, let me present you the outline of my lecture. It pretty much follows the flow of my research article, beginning with the background of the study and the literature review, followed by the discussion of data, method, and findings, and finally, ending with the conclusions of the research. As indicated in the title of this study, its background relates to the Duterte administration's war on drugs launched in 2016 and its flagship anti-drugs program, the Oplan Tukhang. The policy has been criticized as the war against the poor, as it resulted in gross human rights violations and widespread extrajudicial violence committed by state forces in impoverished communities. According to PIDEA, the drug war has resulted to more than 6,000 deaths as of September last year. However, other institutions report higher numbers, such as the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, which reports more than 8,000 fatalities, and the country's Commission of Human Rights, which estimates as high as 27,000 deaths. As the drug war killed male breadwinners in urban poor communities, women are left behind to carry the multiple burdens of caring for their children and providing for their survival. Eleanor Dionisio, in her latest edited book, Women and the Duterte Anti-Drug Carnage, go as far as to describe how women have been relegated into the new underclass among the urban poor due to the war on drugs. As a response to these attacks on families and women, community mobilizations have emerged to provide support to these victims, such as the Project Support for Orphans and Widows in Payatas and the #WomanLaban campaign. In this study, I focus on the case of a group of women in Pateros who, after witnessing the first EJK in their neighborhood, decided to conduct voluntary night patrols to enforce curfews and to ensure that the streets are clear of minors and street drinkers, those who are potential targets of tokhang. Shown in the left side of the screen is the first article written about these women by Dexter Capalza from the Inquirer. Back in 2017, they were known as the Women's Organization, and they changed their name in 2019, now calling themselves as the Ronda ng Kababaihan. By focusing on the experiences of subaltern mothers in Pateros, my research sought to analyze the gendered impact of the Duterte administration's drug war, which has been overlooked in policymaking. Moreover, by understanding the role of motherhood in women's decision to conduct their night patrols, this research sought to challenge the binary assumptions of feminism, activism, and politics on mothers' movements. To achieve these objectives, I raised 3 questions in this research. First, what were the motivations behind the voluntarism of the Ronda ng Kababaihan members? Second, how did the members resist Opnan Tokhang and protect their neighborhood from vigilante killings? And last, what were the personal and public outcomes of the women's voluntarism? In order to guide my research, I surveyed the literature written about motherhood resistance and voluntarism. While several works have recognized how motherhood has been a vital resource for peace politics, security discourses, citizenship, and social justice, feminist scholars have problematized the nature of motherhood, particularly its clashing radical potential and conservative tendency. In my review, I framed the debate between scholars who have written from a maternalist standpoint as opposed to those whose analysis are based on the mother's tradition. Maternalism is grounded on difference feminism and essentialism, which views gender characteristics as innate, fixed, and distinct between men and women. Hence, from a maternalist standpoint, motherhood in political terms can be construed as emotionally motivated and apolitical. For the mother's tradition, motherhood is seen as a historically and culturally variable relationship. In political terms, traditional motherhood is used strategically to legitimize women's role in the public sphere. Moreover, extending the mothering practice in community participation creates an avenue for the negotiation of gender roles without necessarily sacrificing their moral identity and authority as mothers. Maternalism has been criticized by scholars such as Jennifer Shermer, who has extensively written about Latin American mothers' movements. Shermer criticized the maternalist viewpoint as being dismissive of the repressive context that necessitate the politicization of a mother's agency, as it is based on an anti-militarist model of motherhood found only in politically stable states. Furthermore, maternalism has been criticized of reducing women to the unchanging and universal nature of nurturing and peaceful mothers and denies them of their agency. As opposed to maternalism, other scholars approach mothering as a social construct and reconcile traditional motherhood with political resistance. The mother's framework has been reflective of cases of community engagement of subaltern women in the global north and the mother-based social movements in the global south, such as the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo in Argentina and the Comadres in El Salvador, to name a few. Among the theoretical models of motherist politics, I decided to use Shermer's political motherhood framework, which resonates with the context of the Philippines, where there is unequal power relations underneath the crisis of human rights. The framework refers to the process of unfolding consciousness as women progressively move into the public sphere, and it also rejects the dualistic theories of gendered politics as it views maternal qualities as complementary with democratic values. This makes the framework an appropriate lens in looking at the motherist movements in the Philippines, especially since the concept of feminism, activism, and conventional politics do not necessarily fit into the conservative and traditional nature of motherhood. So in examining motherhood from the motherist tradition, I argued that the moment that the members of Ronda ng Kababaihan ensured the safety of each husband and son in their community as a collective, they became political actors in their own right. In doing so, this study sought to highlight motherist grassroots initiatives that are not connected with feminist social movements, a gap in feminist research, as well as the gendered impact of the war on drugs, which has been overlooked in policymaking. So now for the data and method. The research design employed is a qualitative case study with two primary sources being drawn from key informant interviews and field notes from my participant observation. In order to establish rapport and build trust within the organization, I took part in their night patrols, informal meetings, volunteer work in annual fiestas, Christmas parties, and anniversary celebrations. Once rapport was established, I began conducting interviews with the original members of the group. Verbal consent was requested during every interview. And while the respondents were very much willing to have their names published under the notion of transparency, I still sought to use pseudonyms in order to ensure that their safety and privacy will be protected. After transcribing the recordings, thematic analysis was conducted, and furthermore, the data from the field notes also informed the formulation of the interview questions and the contextualization of the respondents' narratives. Here are the profiles of the 8 respondents that were interviewed in the research, and there were limitations, however, in the data collected in this study. First was the inability to interview all of the 16 original members due to the following reasons: the unwillingness of some of the members to take part of the study due to the sensitive nature of the topic, and the fact that other members have changed residences when the research took place. The second limitation was the non-inclusion of the perspectives of other stakeholders, such as the members of the neighborhood, police, and the local government. The initial plan involved a lengthier fieldwork to conduct interviews with these groups, but the COVID-19 pandemic halted the implementation of the field research. The last caveat that I would like to raise is the emphasis on the interpretative nature of this study. The analysis is my interpretation of the worldviews and shared experiences of the members in the attempt to understand the story of their collective. Hence, given these limitations, the findings of this study solely reflect the experiences of the mothers and the convergences and nuances in their narratives. The discussion of results is organized into 3 overarching themes, which correspond to the 3 main questions raised in this study. The first question pertains to the motivations behind the voluntarism of Ronda ng Kababaihan members to conduct night patrols. And the interviews all point toward the December 14, 2016 incident of the extrajudicial killing of 2 men in their neighborhood by vigilantes known as the Bonnet Gang. During that time, there had already been 28 victims in Pateros, 19 of which were killed in their barangay Santa Ana, and this was the first EJK witnessed in Sitio Pagkakaisa, where the neighborhood was located. Right after that incident, the narratives of the women describe a common scene of how the usual Christmas spirit was nowhere to be found and how their neighborhood was reduced to a ghost town. No one was brave enough to walk in the streets at night for fears of being the next targets of Tokhang. The mothers related how their husbands and sons slept in their workplace instead of going home late at night. And one of the most haunting scenes that they would tearfully narrate was how their children and the other kids were traumatized by the EJ case and how they would panic and scream, my bonnet, just by hearing the sound of motorcycles in the streets. Here's a quote from Ami, one of the mothers I interviewed. She said, simula nang may Tokhang dito, para bang na-trauma yung 7 taong gulang kong anak. Kaya siya bumalik sa pag-grade 1 kasi nga nag-stop siya sa pag-aaral. Natakot ba kasi nakita niya kung paano nakahanduso yung pinatay na 2 magtiyuhin diyan. In the same interview, Ami also shared how they had to return to their province that December due to trauma and that her daughter was so afraid that she did not want to return to Sitio Pagkakaisa. For the other respondents I interviewed, they narrated how the only people brave enough to stay outside were themselves, the mothers and wives who waited for their loved ones to return home safely from work each night. It is in these circumstances that urge these women to take action. According to the narratives of the mothers, the creation of Ronda ng Kababaihan can be traced from the mothers who would spend their nights talking and waiting for their husbands and sons to come home from work. One of the members suggested the idea of watching over the streets to enforce curfews, which eventually developed into a voluntary night patrol organization led by the Ronda Girls. From their perspective, they were already outside after all. Kaysa nagchichismisan daw sila, they might as well work together to ensure the safety of the streets. For the women, doing this gives them the assurance that their loved ones would safely sleep at night without any threats to their lives. There was also a personal motivation for half of the respondents behind the night patrols. They were transparent about the history of drug use of the men and their families, and this actually resulted to hostility from their neighbors at the beginning, accusing them of harboring addicts and doubting their reasons behind their initiative. Chris, the leader of the organization, shared her experience of dealing with the reality of her husband's situation and the consequence of her involvement as a volunteer. According to her, nung una pinagtatawanan kami ng ibang kapitbahay namin na kaya lang naman daw kami nagjo-duty dito dahil may mga alaga kaming mga adik. Hindi namin pinansin yun, masakit man tanggapin pero totoo, di ba? Kasi hindi naman kami mga perpektong tao. May mga ganon din kaming history pero hindi lahat ng nagpo-volunteer dito may alaga, may mga kamag-anak. Even with the other mothers, there was this transparency, this raw and honest admission of the drug use of their husbands and sons, and the vulnerability of their loved ones from being the next targets of Tokhang. For those I have interviewed, they were also very willing to use their real names because for them, wala naman silang tinatago. Notwithstanding their admission, the mothers refused to sit back and watch their relatives be killed by the police and vigilantes. By volunteering, they commit themselves in making sure that their loved ones would change while also protecting the lives of their family members. As indicated in the narrative of the leader, not all of the members volunteer because they have family members who suffer from drug abuse. The others feared for their sons and husbands' common name that might lead to mistaken identities. Additionally, there was also the possibility of enemies manipulating the drug list. There was this general motivation among the members to contribute to the safety of Sitio Pagkakaisa and to end the violence caused by Tokhang. The mothers also expressed a moral agency in defying the drug killings. The theme of morality emerged across the narratives, a morality that is grounded in religion and motherhood, geared towards the protection of life. According to one of the respondents, masakit sa akin nung makakaano ako ng pinatay na tao kasi katwiran ko, ang Diyos nga nakakapagpatawad. Eh bakit naman sila hindi nila kayang pagbaguhin yung tao? Pwede mong i-rehab yan, di ba? Pero ang naging hatol, napakasamang hatol, wala man lang chance yung tao, nagmamakaawa na, mababalitaan mo na pinatay na. The members dedicate their nights watching over the community precisely because they wanted to keep their loved ones alive. An EJK victim is someone's father, husband, and son. This does not mean that they condone drug use. Rather, they commit themselves to helping their loved ones who are suffering from drug use change, and killing them is not the moral way to do it, as perceived by the women. It is with these motivations why these women took up the role as the Ronda Girls of Sitio Pagkakaisa, to protect their loved ones, people with or without history of drug use, from being killed by Oplan Tukhang. According to Verbner, who studied about the feminization of citizenship, attacks on the cultural domains of female responsibility create conditions for women's resistance in the face of male-controlled structures of power. In the case of Ronda ng Kababaihan, the drug crisis opened up space for women to resist the culture of violence, as mothers protecting their children and husbands. Mothering then served as an instrument of defiance. According to Rita, one of the most senior members of the group, kaya nagkaroon ng samahan dito dahil takot ng mga lalaki, di ba? Kailangan mga babae yung magbantay. The drug war, which targeted men in impoverished communities, led to the absence of men in the streets. Someone had to watch over the neighborhood at night to serve as extra eyes and ears and deter any attacks from vigilantes. It is this literal and figurative space in their village that the Ronda Girls took up by taking on the role of and responsibility as the watchers of the night, a duty that only the women could carry. Lemaitre, who studied about the narratives of internally displaced women in Colombia, described the dovetailing of the women's community role to cultural responsibilities as the stewardship of life. For the Ronda Girls, by being motivated to ensure the safety of their family through the night patrols, they have consequently protected each husband and son from Tokhang as a collective. The members' moral agency and civic duty are anchored on their mothering, and the night patrols are manifestations of these women collectively caring for their family, neighbors, and the broader community. For the second question raised in this study, it focused on how the members resisted Tokhang and protected their neighborhood from the killings. The act of enforcing curfews and conducting night patrols was only the surface level in trying to understand their grassroots initiative. Any other person could conduct night patrols, but the manner as to how the women did it was different. As a participant observer, I took part in their nightly patrols, both during the nights with and without the police leading the rounds. So every night, the mothers would report to their duties at 10 p.m. by gathering at the makeshift outpost in front of the Chapel of Virgen Milagrosa. It's actually the photo shown on the right side of the slide. So the mothers would start their first round of patrols in groups of 2 to 5 members, while the senior members would remain at the outpost. They were familiar with every route, block, and corner, sharing stories of crimes that happen in each area. The Ronda Girls would also greet each person they passed by a good evening and would even joke with younger adults to go home and sleep. Their familiarity and rapport with the neighborhood were essential in maintaining this cooperative relationship within Pagkakaisa. They used their motherly concern and maternal authority when calling out minors who were still outside during curfew hours. In one instance, one of the Ronda Girls called out one of the kids by saying that you need to go home because you're not from this neighborhood. The other kids insisted that they knew the child, but the Ronda Girls were not easily fooled because they knew every family in that neighborhood. Even when engaging with men drinking in the streets at night, there are times when they permit them to continue their session as long as they would not make any noise. According to the leader of the group, the reasoning behind their approach is this. Ang pagsita may halong pakiusap kasi kung hindi natin kukunin ang loob ng kapitbahay natin, sila rin ang makakalaban natin. Hindi mo kailangan sigain ang nasasakupan mo. Kailangan bonding kayo, may kisama sa inyo, magpaalam sa iyo, sabihin mo. Another respondent, Rita, presented a different reason why it was better to allow a few people in the streets. And that is to make sure that there are witnesses if ever something happens and to deter vigilantes from entering their neighborhood. However, this friendly approach and warm atmosphere that the mothers would bring into their night patrols was pretty much absent during the nights when two police officers would lead their rounds, which would usually occur once or twice each week. The officers' approach towards the people in their neighborhood was domineering and authoritative. As for the mothers, well, they would simply follow silently behind. There was also this wariness among bystanders when seeing police in uniform, giving out warnings and taking pictures of people violating ordinances. So despite the domineering disposition of the officers towards bystanders, the police and the mothers have a relatively close relationship. According to one of the respondents, the mayor actually ordered the officers to accompany the women every night during patrols. But due to the lack of personnel, there were times when the police were unable to join them. Despite this, the Ronda Girls assured the officers that they would cover up their absence, and both parties agreed that if the mothers ever encounter any rowdy behavior in the streets, they would immediately contact the police. The mothers also reinforced the rapport with the police in every occasion. The women were there to serve them food, to invite them to rest at the outpost, or to simply converse and joke around with them. They were also invited to every Christmas, birthday, and anniversary celebrations of the organization. So based on the narratives of the mothers and field observations in the conduct of the night patrols, there was this gendered engagement manifested in the women-led patrols. The members used their moral authority as mothers and familiarity of the people in their neighborhood to enforce curfews. They also exhibit this friendly and accommodating approach to maintain good relations with their community that is grounded in trust and respect. As regards the police, the approach of the mothers was caring and obliging, which enabled Ronda ng Kababaihan to gain allies among the officers and establish a partnership during patrols, albeit asymmetrical in nature. More importantly, in doing so, they were also able to call out any abuse committed by the officers. It was this calculated resistance that emerged from the mothers maintaining their friendly relations with the police, while also strategically using this to deter and report any irregularities related to Tokhang. For Main and Whetstone, who studied about political motherhood in Egypt's Arab Spring, they described the strategic use of traditional motherhood as bargaining with patriarchy. Furthermore, I echo Diana Taylor's analysis on the mothers of Plaza de Mayo, that motherhood is not always restrictive and apolitical. They can be bold, independent, political, and outraged, even as they take on the role of the submissive and domestic creature. So now we arrive at the final question raised in this study. What were the personal and public outcomes of the women's volunteerism? In the personal realm of the mothers, the most significant change is the negotiation of their civic patrol duties into their traditional gender roles. This had only been possible through the integration of their family members into their community activities. You would see their sons and daughters participating in the organization's activities and patrols, and even husbands helping out to cook food for the entire group. Apart from this, the mothers were able to continue taking on the role as Ronda Girls by reconciling their new duties with domestic roles and gender norms. According to the respondents, their family supports them as long as it won't affect their health and duties at home. Actually, I asked several of them how they manage to balance their domestic duties and patrol duties, and they really can't help but be in awe with the capability that the mothers possess. One of the members would participate in the night patrols at 10 p.m. right after she breastfeeds her young one to sleep. Others even had work to attend to during the day, yet they still managed to dedicate their nights to the patrols. And the patrols would end at around 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, 3 a.m. After they're done with the second rotation, once they call it a night, they would return to their homes, rest for a bit, and then wake up to attend to the duties of their families by cooking food, doing the laundry, and taking care of their children. So aside from these domestic responsibilities, gender norms also remain intact. One of the respondents explained that it was practical for their organization to be solely comprised of women, so that their husbands would find little to no reason for jealousy. They were also very careful not to hop behind the motorcycles of police officers during night patrols and would maintain appropriate distance from them. As regards the public outcomes of their volunteerism, what emerged from their narratives is the increase and expansion of women's political participation. The mothers would claim that the EGK that happened back in December 2016 was the first and the last drug-related killing that they witnessed in Sitio Pagkakaisa. Significantly, despite their personal motivations to conduct the night patrols, their civic duty actually went beyond the drug war. They weren't just Ronda girls. These women also expanded their volunteerism through their assistance in funeral services, fiestas, Holy Week celebration, and other events of the municipality, all geared towards public service. So Chris would explain one of the practical reasons behind their long-term commitment to the patrols. According to her, nung una, hindi namin sinabi kay Sir Dexter. Dexter is the first reporter who covered their story, na talagang nagmula yung pag-duty namin sa Tokhang. Ang talagang pinush namin noon, curfew lang. Kasi syempre, hindi naman namin kailangan itutok yung Tokhang, di ba? Kasi ayaw din namin tumatak sa mga bata rito kada may mag-i-interview. And they did just that. Even at this moment, with the new threat of the pandemic, they continue to conduct their patrols and remain true to their word that their duty goes beyond ending Tokhang. Since 2017, the mothers have continued their volunteerism despite the lack of allowances and the threat of vigilante killings. And I argued that the sheer commitment of the Ronda girls to the night patrols is rooted in their mothering. Lemaitre describes this as a gendered strength demonstrated through the caretaking of the family and the entire community. It is this gendered strength that allowed the members to stand in the front lines of the drug war. I am sharing here a quote from Anna, one of the respondents. So for Anna, caretaking has been a huge part of who she is as an individual, from earning a living as a house help to raising her 8 children as a mother. According to Anna, talagang iba ang damdamin ng babae, di ba? Talagang nasa puso niya yung pangangalaga kahit sa loob ng pamilya niya, kahit sa labas ng bahay niya sa komunidad. Andon yung sinasabi nilang pusong mamon. Bibihira lang sa lalaki ang may pusong mamon, karamihan sa babae yung tumutubo. Hindi mo naman masasabi, hindi lahat ng babae ay matulungin, karamihan. Kaya sa pagiging pusong mamon ko, kaya ako naging isang women's. Anna and her husband both had to earn a living to feed their family. There are times when she is not there to watch over her children. Knowing that she can rely on this group of women eases her anxiety when she is away, and in turn, the other mothers can trust her to do the same for their children. Göksel, who wrote about the Kurdish mothers' peace activism in Turkey, described how the politicization of motherhood is the transformation from its biological relation to rearticulation of care and redeployment of the link between mother and community. By conducting night patrols, the Ronda girls not only watch over their own family, but for every child in the community. Furthermore, Schirmer also termed motherist movements as a collective citizenry of political motherhood, where the fight for family and human rights, albeit implicitly in the case of Ronda ng Kababaihan, is unified and realized. The Ronda girls volunteer to stop the killings with the belief that drug users have a right to live and be rehabilitated, not arbitrarily executed. The case of Ronda ng Kababaihan challenged the supposed natural duty for care work assumed in the maternalist tradition. Mothering, which was previously confined in the household and solely cared by mothers, has been extended throughout the community and practiced as a collective by the organization. The case also contradicts the feminist critique of the motherist tradition as reinforcing of the traditional restrictive gender roles, as the members legitimize their presence in the streets through their traditional motherhood, enabling them to perform their civic duties as Ronda girls. Furthermore, the synergy of traditional gender roles and the crisis-induced resistance of Ronda does not conform to the exclusive and gender dichotomies found in Western feminist frameworks. Instead of moving from the private domestic feminine sphere into the public political feminist sphere, the Ronda girls can be understood as being caught in between and everywhere. They never recognize their initiative as political despite their radical actions saying otherwise. From their understanding, being political actually meant engaging in dirty politics, yung pamumulitika. So the grassroots initiative in Pateros blurred the lines that impose these exclusive and gender dichotomies of what is political and feminist, which also shows how our conventional and hegemonic understanding of politics, activism, and feminism are inadequate in fully capturing the worldviews of the mothers and the cultural context in which their agency took place. In my poor attempt to be poetic and to do justice to the story of Ronda ng Kababaihan, I concluded in my study that amidst a crisis of human rights, it takes a village led by fearless mothers to protect the life of every child. In this study, I raised 3 questions and presented the following findings. First, that the primary motivation behind the night patrols was to protect their families by defying state-sanctioned killings and deterring police vigilantism. Second, how the mothers' gendered engagement allowed them to maintain good relations with their neighborhood and gain allies from the police. And lastly, how the patrols led to significant impact on the private and public aspects of the women's lives. I also concluded that the moment the members of Ronda ng Kababaihan ensured their husbands' and sons' safety through their night patrols as a collective, they became political actors in their own right. Furthermore, as the individual responsibility of motherhood became a collective duty of the community, they facilitated what can be construed as the expansion of mothering and care work. Looking at the larger national context under the Duterte administration, and I would like to thank my reviewers for pointing this out, the expansion of care work can be construed as resulting from state neglect and aggression towards families and children under the Duterte administration's war on drugs. Instead of providing care and protection to children and the youth, the Duterte administration has not only neglected their welfare, they are reduced and dismissed as collateral damage of the drug war. In affected communities such as Sitio Pagkakaisa, women are compelled to take on the role as protectors of men, youth, and children from state aggression, thus adding on to the multiple burdens to women's care responsibilities. Given the limited scope of this study, further research is needed to explore the implication of how the drug war has resulted to a crisis of care in the Philippines. I also emphasize in my research that the municipality of Pateros must support the institutionalization of women-centered and led grassroots initiatives such as Ronda ng Kababaihan to encourage women's participation and foster a less confrontational means of social control. The local government must also ensure provision of allowances and equipment for the night patrols, as well as psychosocial services for women and children suffering traumatic experiences due to tukhang. For future directions for research, they can delve deeper into the impact of women's patrols on criminality, the difference in the nature and dynamics of civic engagement between men and women, and the role of religion or Marianismo in women's political participation. That is the end of my lecture. Thank you very much for your time.
Many thanks, Assistant Prof. Marcaida, for this very important work. Yeah, indeed, thank you for surfacing the voices of the women affected by the political nature of violent nature of Duterte's drug war. And I think I like the way you framed the narratives as a form of resistance. And I love the quotes that you selected for this presentation. I believe your work has really contributed to the academic literature on political motherhood. At this point, I'd like to open the virtual floor for your questions and comments to Assistant Professor Marcaida. Anyone? Assistant Prof. Iglesias, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Incitas Franco. And I'd like to congratulate Assistant Professor Marcaida for her research. I told her before when the tenure lecture poster came out, I was really, really interested in her work, because I also work on the war on drugs violence, but really from more in terms of the national trends. I think what Professor Marcaida has done is really add to the unfortunately, very limited ethnographic research that is available, that has been done on the war on drugs, which has actually provided contradictory findings. No? Especially, but there is a rural urban divide, it seems, because in urban areas, this which had been most affected by the war on drugs, it's very clear that elements of fear, and now what Professor Marcaida is surfacing are elements of resistance. And this is extremely valuable for us as we try to grapple with understanding this mass violence that our country has experienced. So my question is, because thinking about the broader trends, what Professor Marcaida has reflected, or rather what the information she's presented has reflected, is that overall trend that the concentration of the violence was much earlier on, the first few months of the Duterte administration, and then it petered out. And one of the critical, in some research that I'm doing on the role of resistance and the critical points that tended to escalate the war on drugs, but also de-escalate the violence, was the killing of Kian de los Santos, Carl, and Arnaiz, because there was an escalation of the violence in August 2017 throughout Metro Manila. But then, because of the resistance, the protest, and really the sheer public outcry after the video of Kian de los Santos getting killed went viral, no? This was a major turning point in the violence overall. So what I would like to ask is, did this figure in any of the discussions based on your interviews with your respondents? And again, thank you so much.
Should I go ahead, Ma'am Jean?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. So before anything else, thank you, Ma'am Jean, for the very kind words. And thank you very much, Ma'am Sol, for the wonderful question. Regarding the issues of the killing of Kian de los Santos and other related killings that would relate to the national situation under the Duterte administration's war on drugs policy, unfortunately, these issues did not emerge in the narratives. What's also interesting to note is that their perspective regarding their initiative, it's very communal, it's very personal for them. When I ask if their perspective of their initiative is political, they would have a solid answer that it isn't political kasi para sa amin lang naman to. And I do think that by having those kinds of narratives, it might cause to certain scholars to dismiss their initiative as not political, which I do think challenges how we understand what is political and feminist in the first place. So by widening our understanding of what is feminist and political, probably we can find more of these initiatives that actually have this radical potential of being feminist, but not in the conventional hegemonic understanding that we would usually have. So thank you very much.
Anything else, Assistant Prof. Iglesias? Okay. At this point, I'd like to call Associate Professor Tagibao for his comment or question to Yang. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jean, and thank you very much also, Assistant Professor Marcaida. I learned a lot from your presentation, and I was particularly interested in your mention of two broad traditions in the literature, the maternalist and the motherist, which I admit, this is the first time I encountered it. I really have no clue, so I learned a lot and I appreciate that very much. My question, I wrote some notes, but I just have a primary question, but also permit me to break them down into smaller questions, but they're actually lumped into a single question. I'm curious from your research and also from the narratives from the point of view of the Ronda ng Kababaihan, where was the state in their context, no? From their point of view, nasaan ang estado? Where is the state? Did you sense, for instance, any distinction in their narratives between, the distinction between what is national and local, for instance? I'm pointing this out because I'm interested, where was the barangay as a formal political unit and as a provider of local security in all of this? Because as you also mentioned, the very initiative of putting up a Ronda ng Kababaihan might also have indicated, for instance, inadequacy, neglect, or for that matter, dissatisfaction towards local barangay security. So I'm quite curious what, when they came up with this initiative, did that kind of sentiment surface in your talks and in the narratives that you collected from them? And for that matter, I was really curious also, what was the position? Where was the local barangay positioned in all of this? Just that. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you very much, Sir Jazz. So to answer the question on where was the state, where was the local government, and even the barangay, where they had a very apprehensive position when raising their views regarding the police and even the barangay and even the local government officials, because they also want to maintain good relations, but at the same time, you can feel that they're not really satisfied with the kind of protection that's being provided to them, especially when looking at how they viewed the police. They're careful not to directly criticize them because they also have to strategically maintain their good relations with them. What's also interesting is that the local government initially supported their initiative and even lauded them by providing them with resources such as flashlights, a bell, among other things. However, I briefly mentioned this in my research that the local government initiated or established a larger community or organization, which is the CVO, Civilians Volunteer Organization, which was comprised of men and women. And in a way, it absorbed the women's organization and kind of led to certain tensions between them. Now, demotivate sila because for them, it became more political because the issues now were issues of allowances, issues of who gets to be in power, who gets to be in charge. And it also resulted to them having a hiatus shortly in 2019 because they weren't really happy with how this was established, the CVO, under the local government of Pateros. And apart from that, I would also like to raise an interesting observation that I made, that the CVO before was actually geared towards the collection of basura, of trash. And it was only during the 2017-2018 revival when its initiative was now geared towards night patrols. So in a way, it was inspired by the initiative of the women's organization. And it also, of course, led to certain tensions and issues for them. And thankfully, they were able to manage to reclaim their authority as Ronda Girls in Sitio Pagkakaisa back in 2019. They revived their women's organization by now calling themselves as Ronda ng Kababaihan, as a response as well to their issues with the larger CVO of the municipality of Pateros. Thank you, Sir Jal, for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else who has a comment or would have a question for Marielle?
I think Pearlie is raising her hand. Jean?
Okay. Associate Professor Frago,
Hi.
you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Jing for having reached this far. And thank you also for sharing findings and results of your study, which is very interesting. I find it very interesting, especially since you focused on the narratives of women. And I really learned a lot from your lecture as well. I'm just, aside from the congratulations, I just am also curious about one thing. No, so yung Ronda ng Kababaihan, you referred to in your study as a voluntary organization. I'm just curious if, regarding your opinion as to the sustainability of this organization as a Ronda, no? So as women's organization that is bound to monitor such events. So do you think that this organization will likely be sustained beyond the issue of the war on drugs, meaning beyond this administration? Or is, so that question first.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Pearlie, for the kind words and the question. Regarding the sustainability, it's also remarkable to note that even in the time of COVID-19, they continue to conduct their night patrols in Sitio Pagkakaisa. Actually, they're asking for help in terms of alcohol and even masks because they lack those kinds of resources. And apart from that, I don't really want to romanticize their plight because they do lack resources. They are suffering from these threats of tokhang and they are suffering socioeconomically. But I would also not want to dismiss the fact that how authentic and how committed these women are to their volunteerism in ensuring the safety of their community. So one of the recommendations that I made in my article is to institutionalize further these women-led and women-centered community grassroots initiative in order to further encourage women to participate not only towards the drug war, but towards public service in general. And apart from that, I do think that in order to fully support them and to fully ensure the continuity of this initiative, the local government should also do its part in providing them with allowances because that really helps a lot in making them, on encouraging them to continue being in the service of the entire Pateros or at least in Sitio Pagkakaisa. So, yun po, ma'am. Thank you po.
Okay, so thank you. So I think that it is to be noted, no, that even the trust of the organization tends to expand. No? So after all, when you say Ronda, it can cover not just yung monitoring of these events.
Wow.
No? It can include other things. No? So that is very interesting. So I was going to ask about yun nga, no, yung idea of whether yung Ronda ng Kababaihan is an organization, no, in your opinion, really an organization or a movement, no, that tends to evolve as issues issues come and go. No? So yun yung parang gusto kong, that's something that I want to focus on. But then you did say that after all, Ronda ng Kababaihan is a voluntary organization. So that in itself is something that we should stress or emphasize. So thank you very much. So good luck in answering all of the other questions in your lecture.
Thank you rin po, Ma'am Pearlie.
Thank you, Associate Professor Frago. Anyone else? I'd just like to add to the discussion earlier on the institutionalization. Ako naman, my own panaginip or the idealist in me says that I don't want to institutionalize things like this because it's an additional burden to the already multiple roles that women play in their private homes and in societies. And this is also a form of unpaid work. No? Maganda rin na nga nasabi mo dapat may allowance pero kung allowance hindi pa rin siya talaga work. So my dream is that the state really provides security. Kaya lang nga in the absence of in in the context in which the state is actually the perpetrator, syempre, things like this surface, no? So yun. My question really is just to, for the benefit of students who are here right now, watching this, attending this lecture, as a qualitative researcher, Associate Professor Marcaida, and using a feminist lens as that, can you parang narrate to us how, what are your reflections about doing this research, and how did the women uh, react, when you told them that you're teaching in UP, learning about the drug war and its impact on them? What do you think have they learned from you, and what do you think you learned from them? No? So this is something that usually qualitative researchers take into account. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Jean. That's a very interesting question. And regarding my reflections as a researcher and a participant observer, one of the, I think, most significant things that I realized is how much my being a woman helped in my establishing rapport and trust within the organization. Because if I was a man, it's going to be more difficult, which I have personally experienced when I brought along with me a research assistant who was male. Nung sinamahan niya ako na mag-participate dun sa night patrols, I noticed that the women got really conscious by the presence of this man who was listening to this very feminine activity, yung chismisan. But of course, as a researcher, chismisan is data. And there are important themes that emerge there. And I learned from that, and I decided not to bring him anymore. And apart from that, I also realized how much myself being a participant observer also affected how they treated me. In a way, they were very accommodating and receptive of the fact that I'm from UP, because for them, having someone, a reporter or academic who's interested to share their story is a huge thing for them, because it's a way for them to put their story out, kung kanino man ito makakarating. So that would be my answer to your question, my reflections as well as the reaction of the members of Ronda ng Kababaihan with my participation. So they were very accommodating, and I would like to thank them for that and for trusting me to share their story.
Hey, thanks. Yang, thank you for that sharing of information. Really, I hope some students who are here have learned a lot from this research and from your reflections. Okay, anyone else who would like to share their with us their
Jean,
observation?
si Ella, Jaime, at saka si Miko nakataas yung kamay.
Sorry, so Professor Atienza,
Okay,
you
thank
have the
you,
floor, please.
Jean. Okay, congratulations, Yang, for this tenure lecture. Of course, I will not ask a question. It's more of a set of very brief comments, because maybe for the benefit of people who are listening, watching, but are not familiar with us in the department. I'm the editor of the Philippine Political Science Journal. So I've seen the evolution of Yang's paper from the first time it was submitted for review. And then, of course, the journal process requires choosing the most eligible reviewers, academics as reviewers. And we were fortunate to actually find very willing but excellent researchers in their own right, using a feminist lens in actually helping Yang flesh out some of the major points of her paper. And we are very pleased in the Philippine Political Science Journal to see how Yang has responded to the comments and the suggestions of the reviewers. But my comments basically are for the benefit of the students listening here, particularly students who are still in the process of maybe trying also to find areas for research. And taking off from Yang's presentation, I guess two important things. First, when it comes to doing qualitative research, it's important in the case of like what Yang did in her study, to try to use different types of research methods and research frameworks to try to find out possible answers to a research question. So in this case, the drug war, but she found a particular case study. Of course, this was helped through a grant, but this is an area where using feminist lens has been very important in actually shedding light into an issue that may be very difficult to actually handle and do research using other methods. At the same time, also using a feminist lens also extends mainstream views about the interaction between formal institutions and informal institutions. So in this case, we have the role of mothers, voluntary group of mothers doing their ronda. We see the evolution of the organization. But a second point that I also wish to highlight, and I hope students can also get from Yang's presentation and her sharing of her research, is that of course, here she used a feminist lens, but using ethnographic research also sheds light to what we call in political science as everyday politics. Of course, again, the focus here is on the role of mothers on a particular issue and how their roles have evolved and how they contributed to a particular problem or issue in a community. But we see here perhaps the tensions between a voluntary organization that started out in a different way, evolved in a particular way because of the nature of the issues being confronted by the barangay. But at the same time, we see the tensions between being a volunteer organization and of course, the women may not see their work as completely political, but definitely it's political because they are dealing with a very important issue that affect not only mothers, but the whole community. But at the same time, also we see the tensions and the interactions with state institutions, including local government institutions, and the problems of any organization that started out as a volunteer work, but at the same time, in interacting with formal institutions, they now face the issue of further organizing, institutionalization, but at the same time, what are the advantages and disadvantages of formalizing and institutionalizing the work of the organization or the voluntary organization, and at the same time, what are, in a way, the advantages and limitations as well of a purely voluntary and, in a way, a more natural reaction to issues. So I hope students, by listening to, and I hope you can read the paper, the actual paper of Yang. It's available through the main library. You can pick up new lessons and new ways of actually problematizing issues and doing research in political science. So thank you very much.
Ma'am, may I quickly respond to my
Sure.
Ma'am, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be a part of that issue in PPSJ, and of course, very appreciative of the rigorous review process. Actually, one of the insights in my conclusion came from my reviewers, because I missed the national aspect of the grassroots initiative of the Ronda ng Kababaihan. And in a way, I do want to pursue that as a research direction for my PhD, because I think that's also something that we need to look at, how the war on drugs has resulted to some sort of crisis of care manifested by the emergence of these grassroots initiatives that would provide for care work and protection to women in the absence of state protection. So thank you very much, ma'am.
Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Atienza. May we hear from Assistant Prof. Naval, and then later on, Assistant Prof. Gloria.
Thank you very much, Professor Jean. I continue to learn a lot from the lectures that are being delivered by our professors who are for tenure. Sometimes I feel I should seek even more longer in trying to relate to the points and discoveries that you share. The presentation stokes a lot of concepts and has implications on policy and practical life. For example, the word resistance, which has been a number of my colleagues have commented on the word resistance. Uh, uh, Conventionally, the word resistance would imply something that's negative. From a negative point of view in terms of defiance, resisting, demonstrating, or opposing. But in this case, I think maybe one area for future study is maybe the idea of resistance from a very positive plane. For example, if resistance would mean that you turn something that is negative into positive, then that's not resistance in the negative sense. In some literature, that would be called proactivity. And it would also be in the realm of resolutive, self-help, or resilience. The word resistance from a leadership and also ideological perspective reminds me of the word satyagraha by Mahatma Gandhi. Ironically, satyagraha means passive resistance or passive nonviolence. But then in substance, it turns to be active nonviolence when you try to counteract a negative situation by doing something positive. So maybe that's one aspect conceptually that even future researchers may want to explore. But then I also point to the not only on the conceptual, but the paradox that your study brings about, and they are affected by two terms: the terms resistance and also de facto the exclusiveness that the association, however, projects. Parang may allergy yung mga kababaihan in allowing the men to have a more substantive role or participation in the ronda or in the women's group in general. Which is a paradox to us because while they're doing something that is very resolving something or protecting something or counteracting something, we cannot isolate the sector of the women and whatever advocacies they have from the larger issues of having to relate with others in society. True enough, women have been victims, even continuing, by a number of the patriarchal perspective that the society has. But at the same time, we have to accept that the constructive and positive contributions and engagements of men and women would lead to something that would be advancing the advocacies, including the Rwanda. So, in a world and in a time when inclusiveness is a byword, where we may have to watch out for the exclusivity or exclusiveness that may be lurking. Kumbaga, we detest those who are myopic and parochial, but in the same time, we should watch ourselves from being myopic and parochial. And then it also comes aside related to this inclusivity and exclusiveness, the idea of emulating. A model has been presented to us at a macrocosmic level, and the idea not necessarily of replicability, but it is something that is worth emulating. So we may have to look into this aspect of replicability, and it would have implications on policy and even practical or daily life. I cannot help. We are both handling Durkheim and our side too. But one concept or phrase that resonates to me is the concept of organic solidarity. And I think it's not mechanical, it's not familial, it's not tribal, but it's a group bonded by a common cause or certain items of advocacy that transcends even their concerns for their family, but for the larger good. Although, syempre, the family is one of the key points or anchors of their volunteer association. So congratulations again, Professor Yang. You're bringing out something. This is not national, but it unearths and it enables us to introspect even more at the level of the neighborhood. And the neighborhood definitely is part of the larger national polity that we study. Thank you very much.
May I quickly respond to?
Please.
Thank you po. Thank you very much, Sir Jaime, for those points. Actually, I would like to echo some of the points that you've raised. For example, Satyagraha and the passive and subtle resistance manifesting from the Ronda ng Kababaihan. And I do agree that it is a passive kind of resistance because they are mobilizing for public service, but underneath this is a reaction to state neglect and state aggression. And in a way, it is also reflective of the unequal power relations among genders and on how they manage to create a kind of initiative against a kind of political structure that is led by men. And regarding the point about the allergy of men, in a way, I would agree with this that as mentioned in my presentation, they were very careful on making it exclusively for women. But there are instances wherein they have been inclusive to members of the LGBT. Actually, one of the members identifies himself as tomboy, and they call him kuya. And there are also other original members and incoming members who are also bakla or incoming members of the LGBT. So there is that kind of performativity of gender that is present within the organization in the face, of course, of the kind of societal and cultural context that is present in the Philippines and in the smaller case of Pateros. So thank you very much, Sir Jaime.
Okay, thanks. We will move to Assistant Prof. Gloria's question.
Thank you, Ma'am Jean. Yeah. Hello. Good morning to everyone. Hey, Yang. Thank you. So, you know that we've been discussing your paper for many moments already, and to be quite honest, I really have mixed feelings about the implications of your paper. Although the method is indeed very groundbreaking for me, especially as a quality researcher. But I can't help but have this conclusion, and this is where my question comes in. No? I hope you could just comment on this insight. And my primary insight is that the Ronda as a movement, the Ronda Girls as a movement, actually furthers oppression based on gender. And I say that because I was focusing on the conclusion that you've made on your how question, which is how did the Ronda Girls basically do their rounds. So in that conclusion, it was emphasized that they actually reinforce their traditional gender roles. No? And for instance, you've mentioned that they have used lesser aggressive approaches, yung pagiging pusong mamo nila and using pakiusap, they used it. No? So essentially, it still identifies women into, stereotypical identities. No? So this reinforcement of these traditional gender roles, I think, in my opinion, essentializes feminine, masculine, stereotypical identities that you have identified. And by, emphasizing this, which the Ronda movement did, no, I think it has the tendency that it furthers discrimination, that victimizes not just women, but all non-conforming identities under patriarchy. So in a sense, what I'm really trying to point at is that the Ronda as a movement, and it's fitting that I followed Sir Naval's question, tends to be very exclusive to those particular roles or identities that you have mentioned, made Ronda as a Ronda itself, if that makes sense. So yun nga, yung pagiging pusong mamon, pagiging passive nila, minus these identities, it wouldn't be a motherist movement altogether. And I actually think that this kind of movement should not be replicated. As Ma'am Jean has mentioned, it's a reaction to the lack of formation or formal support that the state should have been providing in the first place. No, so and you've also identified like a quote there that yung under what conditions will this arise, and you've mentioned it is only in conditions when cultural traditions or cultural positions of women are being attacked, that motherist movements will arise, something to that effect. So for me, that in itself is already limiting or categorizing genders into specific groups. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's my comment and
Thank you
question.
very much, Nico. Those are very important insights that also echo the criticisms of the motherist and even the larger maternalist tradition in trying to understand mother-based movements. I echo, of course, from the mother's standpoint, that motherhood in itself should be viewed in a constructivist manner. It is a social construct. It can be negotiated, expanded, not only within women, but also beyond women, across the entire community, for example, by essentializing women as nurturing and caring individuals. I do think that it also denies them of their agency, because they had the choice not to conduct night patrols, but they still did it. And mothering has been a very important resource for them, because in contexts such as the Philippines, wherein we have unequal power and gender relations, mothering can be a legitimate resource, can give you access to the public sphere with this kind of context. So there was this opening that emerged due to the drug war, an open space that they took up. So in that case, I do think that that is a way of embracing their agency as individuals. And apart from that, I would also like to raise how their mothering in itself as a practice, which actually expanded not only within themselves as women, but also with the other sectors, for example, LGBT community, tomboy, bakla, they also practice that kind of mothering. And as mentioned by that quote of Anna, she recognizes that there is this puso mamon that can be found in women, but not all women are nurturing, karamihan. And at the same time, other people who are not women are capable of exemplifying these maternal and feminine practices that are viewed as inferior in the conventional feminist sense. So in contexts such as the Philippines and even in the global South, with this kind of context, mothering can actually be a very important resource. And touching on these kinds of issues would give them more access to the public sphere. So that's basically how I would answer that question, that when trying to understand motherhood, not in a essentialist standpoint, but in a socially and culturally sensitive kind of tradition, as reflected in the motherist tradition in my study.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Nico and Yang. Your discussion actually clarified the earlier comments and questions. Yeah, at this point, I'd like to read the comments on the chat box, and I'd like you to respond to it, Marielle, before I call Nat Candelaria. From Assistant Professor Hannah Nario Lopez of the Sociology Department. Congrats, Yang. Professor Yang, I am interested if in any of your respondents' narratives, was there an attempt to socialize daughters or younger women in the way that they mother? Was there, in Chodoro's terms, active reproduction of mothering? And then there's a question from the YouTube live chat. Galing kay E.G. Imperial, what are the difficulties that you have encountered with your method as participant observer, since you have mentioned that you also participated in the nightly rounds?
Thank you po for those two questions. First, I will try to answer Ma'am Hannah's question regarding the active reproduction of mothering. And actually, there was one case, a respondent who had her daughter participate in the night patrols. However, it wasn't really sustained in any way. But I would also like to point out how the other children of the members participated not directly in the night patrols, but in other activities in order to assist the women. And as mentioned in my presentation, even the husbands would also support the Ronda ng Kababaihan by participating in cooking food for the women, which can be viewed as also kind of a woman's work, as the literature would perceive. So there is this active reproduction of mothering, which also reinforces the view that gender is performative and it is a social construct that can be practiced not only by women, but also by men and other sectors. So for the second question from EG Imperial, thank you very much for raising this question regarding the difficulties I have encountered with my method as a participant observer. There was the difficulty of participating there personally and directly because it was a night patrol that would begin at 10 a.m. and would end at 3 in the morning. So of course, as a woman, I have fears na kung anong mangyari sa akin by going home at a very late time. So that's one of the personal issues that I've experienced when practicing participant observation. At the same time, as an outsider, I also feel that I influence in some way how they share their narratives with me. I think that I have reinforced, in a way, this moral superiority over other groups as emerging from the perspectives of the mothers, because from their perspective, what they're doing is actually better than what is present with the CBO. So there is that kind of factor of having myself as an outsider participating in their night patrols. So those are my insights regarding that question.
Thank you, Marielle. At this point, I'd like to call Nat and then later on Prof. Lusterio Rico. Nat?
Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to congratulate Assistant Professor Marcaida for delivering this lecture. Yang, if I may, I would like to ask, and this might be beyond the scope of your research, but how did civil society in general react to this kind of endeavor? Are there attempts to engage with them? Kasi for instance, I used to work with the OutDev program of UP-SEEDS, and we have several organizations as partners before, although I'm no longer connected with them, but I think their engagement continues up to this day, And as regards to that, may ganung klase bang engagement trying to, I would not say capacitate, but to help strengthen the movement that is in Pateros?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nat, for that question. Regarding the efforts of the civil society to reach out to Ronda ng Kababalaghan, there had been a lot of attempts to connect with them. I would like to emphasize, for example, I've heard from the mothers that Vice President Tenure actually connected with them because what manifested from their initiative is a kind of governance that's geared towards mothering. That's a nurturing and kind of governance, basically. I would also like to raise how other politicians have also sought to, in a way, from my perspective as an individual and as a researcher, try to take advantage of Ronda ng Kababaihan. And not only politicians, but even members from the media who wanted to raise their story in a positive, in a negative light. One of the stories shared by the mothers with me was that there was this media organization that wanted to request from them to actually put themselves in danger so that the media would have content to be aired in their show or program. So the kind of goal, the kind of motivation that these civil society actors would carry with them from reaching out to these mothers also vary in positive and negative aspects. So thank you very much, Nat, for raising that question.
Yeah, okay. Professor Lusterio Rico, please.
Yes, thanks, Jean. Hi, Yang, and congratulations for your tenure lecture. Very well done. I just want to say that and emphasize also that I think the important contribution of Yang's study is the application of the framework to a very relevant political issue of our time. So for those who are studying politics, I just want to echo what Professor Atienza mentioned earlier, about the evolution of this study. Of course, we always learn, even for people like me who's already, well, I wouldn't consider myself old yet, no, but you know what I mean. No, but we learn a lot when our work is reviewed, and we get insights from other scholars. So I'm also very happy that the others have also contributed what they think, how the study can move forward, no? And Yang has already expressed how she would like to also proceed from this particular study. All in all, I just want to say that I appreciate so much the demonstration of how qualitative research can be applied in a very, as I said, very relevant current political issue of our time. So congratulations again, Yang, and thank you for this brief time. Thanks.
Thank you very much din po, Ma'am Rico, and of course for recommending my tenure. I am grateful for that po.
Okay, thanks, Professor Rico. Anyone else who has a question? What about from our other visitors? Wala na? Going, gone. So, kung wala na, once again, congratulations, Yang. I'd like to, do we call other people for the closing remarks? Wala na. So thank you also for listening and watching this very important work from our youngest faculty member, Assistant Prof. Marielle Marcaida. We did learn a lot, and we appreciate the work that you've done. And good luck to the future trajectory of your research area. And thank you